Well, greetings, everybody, and welcome to Root of the Podcast. My name is Kevin Hu. I'm the Connections Director here. First and foremost, I actually wanted to thank all of you out there who are just regular supporters of the ministry here, whether it's through prayer, words of encouragement, financial generosity, all of the above. You know, the need is great, and we could not do this without so many of you just out there just recognizing the work that we're doing and then contributing and supporting us in a variety of ways. So I just want to start by saying thank you, thank you for that. Another thing I wanted to plug and just to add in here is that our podcast goes out through, iTunes, Spotify, and we even push this out to YouTube as well. If you find the content of this podcast valuable, please, if you can, take a few minutes and just give us a like or write a review, something like that. And that way it kind of boosts the algorithm or whatever out there. And it just allows more pastors to find us easily. I do believe in the work that we're doing. I do believe that there are many, 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 many pastors out there who need more encouragement, who need to know that there are others out there that are just like them, that are walking the journey with them. And there are people who want to encourage them and minister to them. So the more we can get the word out, the better. So again, if you find this content valuable, please, if you could just drop a like, share a review, and help us to get the word out. Okay, without further ado, this week I'm actually going to replay one of our more popular podcasts that's been recorded, and that was actually recorded back with Pastor Kevin Butcher and his whole family. And the beauty of this is actually we get to not only hear from Pastor Kevin how the journey was for him, but even more so through the eyes of his wife Carla, through his three daughters, and they get to you get to hear the dynamics of it all and how it impacted them and all of that. So I would just sit down, grab a coffee, grab some tea, because this is a longer one, but it is very deep, it is very good, and I hope you will enjoy this podcast and leave very, very encouraged.
Welcome to Root of the Podcast, and this is Kevin Butcher, and this is somewhat of a minor historical event because this is the first time that Rooted's podcast is not just, that I'm not just speaking, but we have four guests. And tonight, our guests are my wife, Carla, who we've been together for 45 years, but we've been married for 43 years. And our three daughters, Andrea, Leanne, and Caroline, who are now all young women, grown up and of course, long out of the home. And so what we want to talk about tonight is kids raised in the home of a pastor and spouse. And as many of you who are listening might already know, historically, there are many accounts of really good results of pastors' kids growing up and becoming, fully helpful members of society and healthy human beings, and they have families of their own, or they found that it was a good experience growing up in a pastor's home. But there are many others who unfortunately didn't experience life as a pastor's kid that way. And so what we want to talk about tonight is what the experience was of my three girls with Carla and me as they grew up in our home, as we were lead pastors for 33, 34, 35 years. And I hope this podcast finds its way not only to pastors, but also to people who are sitting in the pew, believers who are interacting with pastors and their families, so that not only will this encourage pastors and spouses, but or maybe instruct even if that's possible, but that also maybe folks who are interacting with pastors and their families will get some insight as to how to love well and how to treat pastors' kids, not as some kind of, to treat them like human beings in the name of Christ, so that they can grow up healthy and be productive members of the kingdom of God. So we've got a few questions we want to start with tonight, and this might just morph into who knows what. But as we ask each question, I'm going to have each of my daughters begin to answer, and then I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves as they first begin to speak and tell us a little bit about themselves, and then answer the first question, and then we'll move on into the rest of the podcast. So, Andrea, maybe as the oldest, you can start first. Welcome. And the first question that we're going to ask all of you is, what was it like for you growing up as a pastor's daughter? And so take it away.
Once an oldest child, always an oldest
Yeah,
child.
you bet. You bet.
Oh, I'm Andrea DeSanto, and I have been married to Dusty for almost 14 years, and we have 3 kids, and we actually have a 4th little surprise baby on the way, due September 1st. So, yeah. And so I right now stay at home with my very spunky children, very lively children. And I also help my dad part-time, very part-time, with some of his rooted stuff here in Colorado since they moved.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's what I'm doing here. I would say growing up as a pastor's daughter, I feel like I've done a lot of reflecting later on, like as I have become an adult. So as a child, I really wasn't aware, except for the fact that I had people in school say, like, is your dad a priest? I didn't think priests were allowed to get married, that kind of thing. Like there was a common misunderstanding about what my dad actually did. Besides that, I didn't feel that abnormal, because I think mom and dad, you did a good job in the home of, we were just a normal family. So for me, being a pastor's kid in our home, which is where I spent the majority of the time, to me in the house, we just had our normal family things going on. In the church, I did feel somewhat of like a spotlight was on me a lot, like things were magnified, anything I did. I felt maybe a pressure, for lack of a better word, to go to all the things, attend to all the things, say the right things. And I think it wasn't until college where it became less about church to me, and it became more about who was I finding God and Jesus to be personally in my heart. That's when I started connecting with the person of Jesus, and who God really was in college. So I know I don't want to go too long, but I would say that is my overall.
Yeah, for
limit.
sure. By the way, as you were speaking, I couldn't help but think of that time that you were sitting next to your friend Christy and about the third row, stage right.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I tried to give you the look because you guys were chattering along. I mean, you were a 9th grade or 10th grade or something.
It's
I mean,
normal.
of course, man, if I wouldn't have been thumped when I was in church, I would have been doing the same thing when I was your age. But I remember looking down and then looking down and then looking down. And finally, and I think this is the only time I did this, and all the years that I can remember, what did I say? Do you remember what I said?
I wish people could see me right now, because you had your finger and you go, Andrea, girls. And then that was it. And I was like, oh my gosh, from the pulpit, called out.
And
So bad.
at least I didn't just say Andrea. I said girls. I included your friend. I mean, it wasn't just you, but yeah. Anyway, I don't know why that scenario came up in my mind, but it was a moment. So thank you, Andrea, so much for that kind of introductory kind of perspective. So Leanne, as our middle daughter, you want to share a little bit, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then share just a little bit along the lines of what it was like for you growing up as a pastor's daughter.
Well, Caroline, are you sure you don't want to go next?
Yes, it's giving me more time to formulate my answer.
Okay.
Your mythology, right?
So my name is Leanne, and I am married to John, and we've been married for a little over 5 years, and we have a very passionate 2.5-year-old, and we are also expecting another little child pretty close to Andrea's due date. So I guess I should also add, my husband and I are both licensed professional counselors. He does full-time therapy. I see a few people private practice, but mostly I work for an insurance company in their behavioral health unit. So I would say when I reflect back on growing up, it kind of is, there's kind of two chunks, like before Dad was fired and after. And I would say before, the positive, I think I felt special. And
As an Enneagram 4, we should mention.
That's where it started. And what the picture that I get in my mind is getting to stay late after church and wait to go home with Dad. And there was something really fun about that. And I think I am more of a shy person, or I observe first. And so in some ways, people would come to me, but in other ways that was a lot of pressure. And I think something I still deal with today is, and I think this was just how I interpreted being a pastor's kid, but that there was another layer between me and God. So there was an extra hoop I had to jump through. There was an extra hurdle. There was an extra level of performance. So whatever was being preached to non-pastors' kids or non-pastor people wasn't actually true for me. There was this other performative thing I had to figure out. And I think I'm still working at kind of removing that from how I experience God, but I think a lot of that does come from me, pastor's kid. And I think after, everything happened, everything felt like I just took on this role of I needed to protect you. And so I think I felt more on high alert, and I think just a lot of pressure for me, but then also analyzing, well, how are people going to receive Dad and Mom? And so, I don't know if that totally answers the question. But
It certainly does, especially as an introduction to, your life as a pastor's kid. You said there were two segments. One was pretty cool and one was not so cool. And as you know, we've dialogued about this, and we talk a lot about this in the new book that I have coming out with NAV Press about that firing, and about the shame around it and how it impacted our family, and how it, on the other hand, gave us an opportunity to go deeper, not only as a family, but maybe individually with God. But I have great regret that I think we were so involved with our own pain. I know I was personally, that sometimes I wasn't able to be present to yours, and the fact that some of that was dripping over into your life. And so I'm really glad you brought that up, even though it's a tough chapter out of our history. It was a tough time for our family. Thank you, Leanne. Before we introduce Caroline, I just want to say, here's my co-host tonight. And if this goes well, Carla, I'd like to maybe offer you a position as a permanent co-host on our podcast.
Oh, my word.
Yeah, you would say that. But anything that occurs to you just before we turn the mic over to Caroline?
Not yet. Keep going. And then
Okay.
Thank you, though.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I could just echo everything Leanne said. So.
Yeah, that was a tough moment.
Yeah.
So Caroline, introduce yourself and maybe just a little bit about what, generally speaking, it was like for you growing up. Make sure you say everything just like I told you to say it. Okay.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Let me get my notes out, my script.
Yeah. Good girl.
My name is Caroline. I am currently studying at University of Colorado Boulder to get my master's in fine arts and dance. I am not pregnant. Just thought I'd follow that pattern there. Is that enough of an introduction?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's great.
Okay.
Anything you want to say? Yeah.
I think this question is like, my first response is, well, how much time do we have? Like, I could talk about how it was, how I felt for this entire podcast. So I think what's interesting is like trying to distill it into a couple words. And so I think what's coming up is, I think being a pastor's kid, it was like you were my dad, but you were also weren't my dad. It was
Wow.
like it was an interesting way to grow up, having seeing your dad in the home, like Andrea was saying, which was very normal, but then seeing you um, in a very small way, like a celebrity status. Um, and so I think sometimes for me and just my personality, that also kind of affected how I felt like I could approach you and interact with you.
Mm.
Like, are you my dad right now, or are you my pastor? Or are you, yeah, so that just kind of added a nuance and a complexity to my relationship with you. Um, and I also, it also, I just want to echo too what Leanne said about that barrier, because it did feel like sometimes, um, and I don't say this because I think it's like something you did or I did. It's just the circumstance. But I think that sometimes there was and still is for me a negotiation of like, what am I feeling from the Lord? What is like the word, or the spirit or the heart, and what is my dad? And not that they can't be parallel, but sometimes they may not
I
be.
think most of the time they're the same, don't you?
I mean, right. But in the very few
Yeah.
instances when they're not.
Well said. Well said.
But I think as a child,
Mm.
it becomes enmeshed. And so it's a little bit if that has been something I think that I'm like as an adult have been working through a little bit.
That's so well spoken. Do you think, Carla?
Yeah, I've always said I have two Holy Spirits. Yay-haw!
Okay.
Poor dad.
They quickly degenerate.
Oh my! This is going to become a family therapy session.
Oh my gosh! I
And
just
and
had
for
to
our
joke.
listeners,
I had to joke.
for sure. For our listeners, one of the things I think our girls would agree with Carla and I on, we've always tried to maintain a pretty open atmosphere about sharing our truth. Even when you girls were younger and all in the home, and then since then, even now we regularly ask you questions. Probably you get tired of hearing us ask. I know I ask a lot. Anything else you need to talk about your childhood that you need to process? I don't want anything to be between you and us. If there's something we can make amends for, we can't go back, but maybe we can be present to some pain that still lingers and maybe make amends in a way that might set you free. And so I want our listeners to know this hasn't been rehearsed, although outside of what Caroline just said, I don't think I've ever heard you say what you said quite like that. That was fascinating to me. And again, wish I would have known that when you were growing up. But at the same point in time, we've created an atmosphere where you guys can tell your truth. And I hope that has been helpful to you over the years, where outside of the times when my mom and I would maybe not be as present as we needed to be to your feelings, and maybe we'd be reactive, or we'd shut you down. Hopefully most of the times you could share, and we would try to assimilate what was going on. Hopefully that was a part of your development and your growth and the freedom you experience today. But let me ask another question. So to get maybe just a bit more specific, after you gave kind of those general responses, what would you like to call out for our listeners? What we did well as a pastoral parental couple, and what do you wish we could have done differently? And you may follow up on something you've already said, but it might be something completely different. And just chime in, whoever has something to share, just start sharing.
I would say, this is Andrea. I would say that I think one of the hardest parts for me, especially being the oldest child, is I feel like, and Dad, we've talked about this. You've brought this up a lot, but Mom was around a lot. She was, 100% there. And I felt like it was hard to balance. And I don't know if this is true. This is just how I see this as a child. Hard to balance young pastor and family. Because to be a pastor, hours are not 9 to 5. It is, especially in the church that we originally started in, it was Wednesday nights and Sunday nights. And then there was a third service. So Saturday nights. And so that was, I think, as I reflect on my childhood, that was hard, very hard for me. And now I'm kind of like hyper aware of that in our family. Like, Dusty, you get home and you're home, I mean, I'm not talking like that, but it's just a piece of my childhood. But mom was 100% there all the time. And as a mom, I just have a lot of, now I'm just like, how I just have a lot of love in my heart for her, and how much she gave to her kids.
Indeed.
But something beautiful that I saw constantly was you both working on your marriage. I mean, it appropriately in front of us. It was, we will not be getting a divorce, but we will have arguments, and you will see this. And sometimes there are issues because of dad's job and work. And so we talk about that. And sometimes it's just normal stuff that
baggage.
yeah, exactly, brokenness, right? And so I don't know if that's necessarily attached to being a pastor, because anybody can do that in their marriage. But when I think about the honesty that you guys had in front of each other, in front of us, and just the beauty of like, this is hard, that affects me a lot today in my own marriage, like in front of my kids. Like, the divorce word is not there, but we're going to work on our marriage. And sometimes you're going to hear some tough things, but just know that mommy and daddy love each other. So I just never felt worried about you guys. I don't know.
I'm glad you're sharing that. Aren't you, Carla?
Yeah.
Because sometimes, pastors can feel they feel like they need to put out some kind of vibe in the home that's not even real,
Totally.
So
but you were real.
Yeah.
That goes to my first point of like, it was a normal home. When you got to the inside of the home, we were just like anybody else, in my opinion. For the most part. Again, I know there's stuff that comes with.
For sure. That's a good word. How about you other two? Or Carla, anything you want to throw in? Okay. Girls, ladies.
Yeah. This is
what do we do well and what do we struggle with in your mind?
Yeah. Something that I think is the more conversations I have, like with people my age who maybe grew up in the church and then have like not wanted anything to do with it. I felt, this is similar to Andrew's statement, but slightly different. I felt that what you were preaching, you lived. And it wasn't, and mom too, but mom didn't preach. So it's a little bit different, but like, I never felt like you were up there, like lying or just blowing smoke or just saying what you thought you should say and then seeing you live out something different. Not to say, that you were perfect.
Well, it's not about living it perfectly. I get that. Right.
Right. But like, I knew that you believed, not only did you believe what you were saying, but like but you lived it. And so that to me almost was like, it was affirming in the realness of it all. It's not a show. It's not just like a book. It's not just like this thing we do on Sunday mornings. It is like it permeates the different levels of our lives.
Wow.
What I think now, this I hesitate to say this because I don't really know if it's changeable. I think it's like the nature of the beast, so to speak.
Of pastoring, you mean, and being a kid in a pastor's home. Okay.
Yeah. And I think part of it is me from being like a mutual feeler of people. But like I do feel like a lot of the time at home, I felt your burden.
Mm.
I felt the burden of you carrying the weight of other people's pain, which again, like that's part of your role as a pastor. So
How
how
did
do
that
you
impact you? How did you felt it? Tell me what it did, pro or
I
con.
f- I felt then that there wasn't space for me to come to you.
My. Okay.
Wow.
Um and I sometimes, yeah, I think that that would be the biggest thing. And that I couldn't, but that I also didn't want to because I didn't want to add to it. It's like I could
Wow.
take care of myself. You know, he's got the weight of the entire church body plus, so I can. And maybe that is why I retreated with you a lot
You know what I'm
growing up.
remembering right now is that time when you sat in my office when Mom and the other and Andrea and Liam were on a mission trip, and you heard that conversation with, I'll just say it this way, a leader in our church who was pretty much reading me the riot act, and you watched me. It was before a Sunday morning service. You and I were
Yeah.
together that week. We read the Narnia Chronicles that week, and I think it was one of the greatest weeks you and I ever had personally. But here we are, and I just got pummeled in that conversation. And you saw me wilt, because I did wilt. I'll never forget it. I'm having the emotions in my body right now. And I looked over there at you, and it's one of those moments that I wish I could get back. But so I'm feeling you even as you share that. And I hope there are some pastors that are feeling that. As you said, we do carry a burden. As couples, we carry the burden of many. It's part of the shepherding responsibility. And yet we've got to be mindful, somehow more mindful than I was, that we've got kids that God has gifted us with, and they are our first responsibility to shepherd. And we've got to create a pathway from their brokenness to our hearts. It's not transcended by the brokenness in our parish. That's a really good word, Caroline. And it hurts me to hear you share it, but I'm so glad you share it, because I want our brother and sister pastors and spouses to feel that with you and with us.
Well, and I just want to add too that I feel like my relationship with you as an adult has really shifted in like really healing in beautiful ways. And so what I shared right now is not it's not at all how I feel about you right now, but
That's so cool.
I just wanted to put that out there.
No, and that gives hope too. Somebody might be saying, "Oh my gosh, that's where I've lived. No wonder my kids don't feel open with me." And what you just said is, doesn't have to always be that way. You gave hope in what you just said, and I'm so glad you feel that way, baby. I really am.
Can I backtrack just a
You
tad?
bet.
I think this ties in at this point. One regret I have as being the spouse is at those times when I felt it was out of balance and he was out there doing God's work and saving the world. So even though my gut was telling me as the mom, you need to pull back. Your girls need you. I need you. Oh, but he's out there doing God's work. I wish I would have gone with my gut more. And so maybe those times of the being burdened with the pain, maybe they would have been kept more in balance, because maybe he would have had more energy. Maybe he would have been able to step back. So I'm thinking of spouses out there listening. If you've got that gut, you know your spouse and you love God and you love your kids, and they really are the first priority. So speak up.
And just to back up Carla's words, and girls, you know that I feel this way all these years later. I wish she would have spoken her truth to me.
I mean, I
more.
did sometimes.
You did.
But
You did. You absolutely did. And I got to confess, not to blame it on my Enneagram type, but as an 8, I always thought I knew. So I think there were probably times when she spoke that truth, and I may have been dismissive. I may have been, well, thank you for your opinion, but God told me to do X, and I honestly, I didn't even know about the Enneagram then. I think I just, looking back, I would have just said, well, I was a butthead, but I don't think that's necessarily true. What's true is I I just was so sure of myself and my call. And you know, if there's a pastoral couple out there right now and one of you is holding back and not sharing your truth, we're not talking about haranguing someone. We're talking about saying, I love you. I'm your partner. This is my truth about our family, about our kids. I hope that this part of our conversation helps you open up, tell your truth. And so that maybe not as much as us, you won't look back and say, we wish. So right on, Carla, right on. So Leanne, you want to add?
Yeah, mine is more of a kind of bullet point list. Things that I thought you guys did well, like appropriate transparency with us. I feel like you kept boundaries, but I didn't feel like there were harmful secrets being kept with us.
Good.
In adulthood, or even as teenager, being available, probably more an adult, but being available to my process as I kind of untangled how all of my experiences impacted me, and being available to apologize and hear me out and create a space for my voice. You know, supporting therapy. I think, Mom, you did a great job of preserving as much as you could our childhood and having fun and getting away. And I have so many good memories of family vacations.
That's a good word right there.
But also of like summers in our backyard. So, and I wrote down too, like making your marriage a priority. And like, I knew it wasn't perfect, but I knew you guys worked on it and were committed. I think being kind to our friends, you know, I think that would have felt pretty hypocritical if you wouldn't have had an open home to our peers. I think that was really good.
Wow, that's good.
I still don't know the books of the Bible. And say, I don't feel like you guys put expectations on me that maybe I internalized from other places as being a pastor's kids, but I never felt like you guys were like, you have to know this.
Because you're our kid and you need to show everybody else how to walk with
this
God.
Bible verse. And Mom, I think with
I hear
I don't know how to tell them to be quiet, but
okay.
sorry.
You're good. That's
reality.
Real. That's
real.
life.
This is real.
Yep.
But Mom, I think how you handled Dad's firing, I felt.
That's how I feel about when I hear you talk about the fire.
So just for our listeners, for her 2.5-year-old, we call him, his name is Johnny. I call him Johnny Ringo. And well, you're back. Okay.
It has shut another door. And Dad, I think how you handled that process, because I feel like if you would not have been honest with yourself and with us and humbling yourself to take accountable for what you could take accountable for, I'll never forget you saying, this is what I am accountable to. And then these are the things that I am not responsible for. That helped me. Like, you know, because if you're in your kid's position, hearing these people say these terrible things about your parent, and you're like, I know my parent's not perfect, but I also know they're not this demon.
Yeah.
Like, so anyways, I think those things were good. I think maybe not singing a song in front of the church as a family.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my word.
Can I just give context?
Can we link that song somewhere in this
Can I
podcast?
just say, oh my gosh, we were asked to sing a song as a family. We were doing a family series.
Wait, that'd be the last time we were all together doing something. Oh.
And we sang this song, which everybody loved, right?
We are everybody, and we did not love that.
I thought at the time that you kind of were digging it, but maybe not.
It was about divorce. Anyways,
No, was it
Yeah,
really?
it was. It was about families breaking up, and we were.
yes.
Kind of a sad song,
forgot
really.
It was about.
You mentioned it earlier, but I do think I don't know how you would have done this differently, but you guys had your own stuff you were dealing with after the firing. So I do feel like I felt kind of like a wanderer with my process.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
I think I think Caroline said it, but I definitely absorbed and took responsibility for your feelings, Dad, and
Yeah.
probably a little bit of Mom's too. But I think then I was pretty codependent, and I think I still have to fight that sometimes of like not having to take care of both of your feelings. Um, and yeah, I don't know the practical ways that like a pastor or a person in ministry can like be attending to themselves maybe so that it's being worked out in another way, so then you come home, because I think what I internalized was I'm not safe, the world is not safe, my house isn't safe, not that we were in danger, but it just felt like
Emotionally
volatile kind of thing. And then this might be, I also think I probably would have hated this, but I do think if there's a way to have dialogue about sexuality that's not making it feel taboo, or like you have to be super, I don't really know, again, I don't know the practical pieces of that, but I think I equated Christianity with there's no like sex, it's separate from sexuality, which,
and that honestly
That could be another whole podcast.
that could be another whole
fascinating.
podcast, but that is we've been hearing that more from you guys as you've gotten older. And honestly, what's so amazing is, and again, I hope our listeners, I wish you could see these girls' faces on the screen because they're just laughing and guffawing and whatever, but
Oh my gosh.
I know that we did not feel that way. And so
well,
somehow we
times have changed, I think, a little bit, but
Oh, indeed. That was 20 some
Yeah.
odd years ago, but we communicated something that, and I hope our pastors and spouses are listening, that sometimes you can communicate something inadvertently that you really are not trying to communicate at all.
for sure.
And so, yeah, maybe we'll come back and you guys can give your take on how best to communicate sexuality to, or not.
I don't even know, but that was just
But
something.
that's a word though. Thank you.
Mhm.
I think what's interesting, sorry, is that it's hard for me personally, it's really hard to separate just like being a pastor's kid at times, because some of this is just very normal. Like maybe the boomer generation had a hard time about talking about sexuality because their parents were not necessarily
Oh my goodness.
gifted in that area, which is,
you know the stories about our parents' communication of sexuality. Oh my God.
exactly. And it just, Caroline's like, please, let's stop this
Okay,
right now.
Okay, number 4.
That was just the latest example, but I'm thinking like, gosh, so many of these things could just be translated to like healthy families, I think.
Indeed, I think that's correct. I just appreciate you all so much for being so transparent. Part of me thought that maybe we'd be done with this podcast by now, but I really want to keep going, and then people can listen as long as they want and come back to it. This will be the longest podcast we've ever done, but I just think this is too good. I've got the feeling that this is too meaningful and too helpful. So if you guys don't mind, can we go on just for another 15, 20? Okay. I want to interject a question that was not on the list of questions that I gave you to contemplate, but I think it's important. Well, I was telling you, I just read a book today in one sitting, basically a dialogue between Tony Campolo of Eastern University fame and Bart Campolo, his son. And Tony was a pastor and a professor at the university and PhD in sociology, I believe, and Bart also highly educated and certainly was like a leader in getting Christianity into challenged communities in real and meaningful ways. And yet at one point in time, this son of a pastor gave up his faith. And he does not, in reading this dialogue between Tony and Bart, he doesn't blame his parents at all for that. He grew up in a loving home. But it just makes me want to ask the question for you guys you all follow Jesus. I mean, I would not consider any of you very religious, but I would say you have a sincere belief in Jesus, the Christ, and your life is about following him. What was it about us, if there was something about us that helped you say, Jesus is real, and I want to believe in him and lay down my life for him or follow him too? What would that have been for you? And you may say, it wasn't really you guys. It was this youth group I was in or whatever. And fair enough. But if there is something, I would, because I know most pastors, most parents who follow Jesus want to somehow give him to their sons and daughters. What would you say about how we helped that transfer occur?
Or didn't help.
Or didn't help that transfer occur?
I'm thinking about like pivotal moments in my own life that could have easily been places where I also decided to give up a faith or a wrestling. But I think it was in those moments that, partly through conversations with you, partly because of the church that I was a part of in Philly, that was really important in my journey. The space to have that wrestling. When people, and I still like get really, like my blinders go up immediately when, if
Right.
I'm sharing with someone like a source of pain or whatever, sadness, and the first reaction is, well, God has a plan, and this stupid ass phrase of everything happens for a reason. I hate it so much.
Yeah.
But like these little, like, those things,
Cliches.
I never felt that from you, either of you. I felt like I that is also not to say that you wouldn't challenge me. You would challenge me and maybe speak some perspective and some truth, but then also be like, allow me to experience the pain. And in my own journey, experiencing the pain and moving through it to a new, just moving through it. I think that is something that is continues to propel me to keep following Jesus, to keep wrestling with it, because the reality is that it's not going to be rainbows and butterflies. And so when people present faith as rainbows and butterflies, it's like you're just setting yourself up for failure. And to me, it's an immediate, like, I don't want any of that, because that's not reality. So for me, that's something that you two helped me, was you challenged me, but then you let me.
It created space for you to have your own journey of faith.
Yeah.
And you knew it. And I'm so glad. And by the way, that wasn't always easy. I mean, all of us want to control. We get afraid, we want to control.
I know,
and
yeah.
I remember moments with you, and you and I had a couple go rounds when I think what was going on with me was I was afraid and I wanted to control, but thank God somehow either Carla or somebody pulled me back. Maybe it was the Holy Spirit, and you were able to go on your journey of finding Christ on your own. How about you other two ladies?
A verse that keeps coming to mind, and this is interesting. It's interesting how I do believe everything happens for a reason. Just kidding. I believe.
Never tell me that.
No. I wasn't going to say that, and then I'm like, I got to put that in there somehow, Caroline. But it is interesting to me the ways that God does work things out. So that I remember going to a therapist a few years ago, and she goes, I pray for themes in my life. I pray that God works in themes so that it makes an impact in my heart so that I realize what he's doing. And so right now, not that I'm working out no, I am working out my faith with fear and trembling, to be honest. And so that's the verse that keeps coming to mind, working out your faith with fear and trembling, because Caroline, I hands down wholeheartily agree with that, of what you said about mom and dad, that because I was just, as you were talking, I was kind of writing some notes, and there was freedom to doubt or question God. There was always freedom. And I it's so important to me to not, I can be shook up when my own kids, and I know I have young kids, so I know there is a lot more to come. But when they come to me with a question about, ooh, I don't know, like, I don't feel God, or why am I praying to God? I don't see him, or these type of questions, it doesn't shake me up to my core. Behind the scenes, I may fall apart with Dusty as we process that. And again, I know there's more to come, but I don't want them to see me shook to the core, because, and I don't think you did that, mom and dad. I think you stayed centered in front of me when I had the questions, when I had the doubt, when I experienced the pain of broken people, because that's a theme, a lot of brokenness that people put on me. And so when I weaved automatically God into that brokenness, you were there. You were there helping me walk through my pain and giving me the freedom and space to question where God was in that, and how real is he, and what is he doing, and all of that. So much so now that it is one of the main things that I want to do for my kids. I want them to feel that freedom and space to come to me with the questions, knowing that I may not have the answers. And in fact, I may be having some of the same questions. And I may be struggling as well. So I felt that from you guys. And I remember a few years ago, Dad, you just saying, like, I just wonder why you girls still love the Lord. Like, what is it? Because I know so many pastors' kids who aren't there. And so I feel like I've really been reflecting on this question for years, and I keep coming back to this. There was freedom. There was always freedom.
Wow. I don't think I've ever, indeed, Carla, I don't think I've ever heard you say it quite like that, Andrea. Beautiful. And I hope it's encouraging our listeners, pastors and their spouses, as they wrestle with how to continue to give away the reality of their faith in Christ to their kids, whether they're little kids or teenagers or grown. So Leanne, anything you want to add to that?
Sorry, can I just say one more thing? I'm so sorry, because I keep getting this flashback in my head, and I'm like, maybe because I keep thinking about it, I should say, because it's about mom. I remember when her dad was killed, and I remember when she found out. It's a very vivid picture in my mind. And I want to say that because it was her falling to her knees in the middle of that pink carpeted weird room with the heater we would put our feet on and all of that. But it was to me, that's a picture of how I remember you guys struggling through pain. Is it was not hidden. It was out, and it was questioning, and it was hard. And so maybe that really does go back to kind of what we were saying earlier about, like, it was out. Nothing was hidden. There was not hypocrisy. So for my mom to give me space to work out my faith, I saw her needing space to work out her faith. And same with you, Dad, in the firing, and even just your own battle in your 30s of, like, what am I doing with my life? So you always spoke openly about that moment. So I am sorry to interrupt you, Leanne.
Not at all.
But I just want to say, I do have these pictures in my mind of you guys doing that, working your own faith out.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that extra piece, Andrea. Leanne?
Yeah, I think what I think is probably, or what I'm thinking is probably similar to what Andrea and Caroline already said. So I'm probably just saying it in a place, repeating the same thing. um, but I just saw that it wasn't clean and like straightforward and easy, and it was a fight. And I think for me, who has like a rich emotional experience, I would have smelled the bullshit
Mm.
if it would have been presented, or if you guys were trying to present it any other way. And I think then I would have been like, well, that has nothing to say to my reality. And so there's nothing. But instead, you know, to the degree that I like felt your doubts and your pain and despair sometimes, you know, I also felt your surrender and your joy and your hope. And it just left me with, I want that. Like,
Wow.
even as an adult, when I'm wrestling, I'm like, but that's possible. Like, I can have that, and I want that, and I need that. So, you know, like I'm thinking with little John when I'm trying to pray with him before dinner, and he's no pray.
No pray.
Pray. And I'm like, what am I doing wrong? And I'm just like, you know what? He's 2.5 but B, it's not going to be me laying out a step-by-step path for him. It's more going to be him watching me. And so the response, not that there's no interaction between me and him that's going to be meaningful, but it's primarily going to be him experiencing me and observing my walk. So
Indeed, that I don't think you have any idea how important that is for every parent to hear, let alone pastors' kids, because sometimes pastors and spouses have this thought that they have to somehow cram all this truth into their kids and that somehow it'll just whatever. And you're basically saying, not that we didn't teach you, not that we didn't help you know what it was to study the scripture, albeit not memorize the books of the Bible, but that you caught the reality of our relationship with Jesus, and it landed, and it's still landing. It's still landing.
And you, both of yours were it was very different.
Yeah.
You know, mom's is like, I just think about mom, you being in a set spot with your Bible or committing to your Bible study, even if it's like with a friend or a group of women. But I just think about I feel like you're like the day in and day out. And I feel like, Dad, yours is a little bit more like, I think about you worshiping in church. So, and just other things, but all that to say, it looks different. I wouldn't say your walks are exactly the same, but I get the same message. Right? Yeah.
By the way, Leanne, I remember well one night you were about 14 and you had a very close friend who was believing something completely differently than Christianity or monotheism or anything. Might have been more cultic or whatever. In any case, she was very close to you and you were starting to dialogue. You're old enough to talk about this stuff in deep and meaningful ways. And one night, you were always a late nighter. You and I would be staying up later than the rest of the family, it seems. And you looked out at me and you said, Dad, and you were all choked up. You said, how do we know that we're right? You have no idea how badly I wanted to sit you down and say, here are the 15 million reasons why your left brain should adapt Christianity for now and forevermore and not ever entertain any other options ever again. Even though I had not lived it that way, I just wanted you to be that secure. But it was almost like I felt God saying, don't go there, son. You be present to this young woman that I've given you and Carla for this season, and help her know that it's okay to have her questions and be present to her. And I don't even know what we talked about that night, but I remember we talked about it and it opened up a long-term dialogue where you found your way and you're still finding your way. I want, hopefully this is intuitive to all of us, but it's a lifelong journey until our last breath. My faith has been shaped even today by reading this dialogue between Bart and Tony Campolo. I have some different thoughts and ruminations about Jesus, who he is, how he interacts with broken humanity. And I'm 66, almost 67 years old. So ladies, thank you so much. I've got one more question I want to ask you, but before I do, I want to see, Carla, is there anything that we've missed? We're going to try to wind this podcast down, but anything you want to ask the girls that just is occurring to you and you say, I hope we can slip this question in? Anything?
I think we could really talk about this forever.
We could.
There's just a lot of practical things in it that I'm thinking about as far as the body of believers, and we've kind of gone the painful route and talking about us being real at home, but what about the people?
Shocker.
Do you know what I mean? Like somebody asked me one time, what's it like to be in full-time ministry? What's the best part? And I would always say the people. And then they'd say, what's the worst part? And then I would say the people. And I guess I kind of want to know, do you have anything to add on to that about how this whole body, like sometimes I felt like we ran a restaurant and people would come to get food, and then when they got tired of what we were serving, they would just leave us. Well, they didn't know that our family looked at that body as our family. So when they would just leave or get mad at us or reject us, it felt horrible. I don't know how that impacts you, and we could talk a long time, and that was just in my mind.
Go
I have
for
a bit
it.
of thought
Yeah.
too.
Maybe this
Well,
might be the last question.
Well, okay, so as the oldest, so as you've heard, we talk about the firing a lot because that was a very pivotal moment in our pastoral family history. I was 17, 18 when that happened. And so that summer when it happened, I went to college. And so a lot of things that you all talk about, I don't have these memories or thoughts. So a lot of my church journey has been post-marriage and college. And it's been my own journey as I've taken breaks from the church body and all of that. But I still come at it with this point of view as a pastor's kid. And one thing that I cannot shake as Dusty and I have moved a significant amount, so we've been a part of a handful of churches. I want to give generously to the pastors and their families. And I can't always monetarily. So sometimes it's my time. Sometimes it's a meal. Sometimes it's a listening ear. Sometimes it's the freedom for a pastor and his wife or their kids, or it could even be an elder or, somebody in leadership in the church to speak freely to where I will not. I'm like, I come to you, no judgment. You needed a space. I want to give you that space because I've seen it all, experienced it all, heard it all when it comes to the church. And so I think of giving generously. The people who have given to our family, I wouldn't have had a wedding without the generosity. I remember when we got a van because of the generosity of the people. I'm just thinking of, because for me, it's easier to reflect on some of that stuff because I didn't see some of the upfront pain. I saw it, but you guys, I'm hearing stories tonight that I'm like, I never heard the story about Caroline sitting outside a office. So all that to say, I could keep going on the gifts, the trips, the things, the time that people gave us to where.
The positive side.
Oh my gosh, it's beautiful. So yeah.
That's great.
Boy, sometimes it can take one dysfunctional, wounded believer that can kind of make you forget all the joy and giving and love from the rest of the people in the parish. So that's a good word. You guys want to add to that how you process, Caroline and Leanne, some of the brokenness in the people, the way they treated you, the way they treated our family?
I keep nodding my head. When I think about one of the ways that I was most personally hurt in the quote unquote firing was, sitting in a youth meeting and having the meeting was to kind of discuss what was evolving at church. And, someone asked one of the leaders, well, how do we know how to proceed. How do we know what to do? And the comment was, well, someone is lying and it's not me. It's either me or Pastor Butcher. And, you know, I think if I were to sit with that person today, I just trust that we would have a healing conversation. But when I think back to that scenario, and then, you know, being on a youth trip when one of the leaders was like, well, like she was trying to tell me, anyways, the destructive relationships were the ones where suddenly Jesus was not, it wasn't, we were not connected. It wasn't about Jesus anymore. Like with that youth leader, it was about maybe his fear, maybe the church politics, I don't know. But, and then when I think about the healing parts, like the generosity, like Andrea was saying, or even the people that stayed, the people that initially stayed just because it was about Kevin didn't stay. And the people that stayed because it was about Jesus and it was just everyone aligning with Jesus, those have been the healing relationships.
Amen.
So I think the most destructive part is when it becomes not about Jesus and it either becomes about the head pastor or something else. But
Good word.
yeah.
What Paul says in Colossians 3, you know, but it's about Christ who is all and in all. If you don't land there, good luck trying to sort out all the rest perfectly all the time. It just isn't going to happen. Anything you want to add, Caroline?
Yeah, I was just thinking of like a specific actioning or action. I just remember countless times, and this is with the firing and not in the context of the firing, but so many times you coming home and saying so and so left the church, so and so up and left, like so many times that it's just like it became so repetitive. That stuck with me so much, how that affected you, even if it was not maybe an argument or something really explosive, just the lack of communication and dialogue. So much so that even when I was leaving Philly to come to grad school, I had, I have an established relationship with my pastor, and there is no, like, he knows how much I love that church, but I still made a point. I was like, I'm having coffee with you before I leave. And and there was a moment he was like, not like, why are we doing this, but also like, why are we doing this? And I was like, no, you have to know. Like, I needed that dialogue. Just because I know that the lack of communication, how much that affected you, and then therefore trickled down and affected the family. But so that's just like one because sometimes it is just like I'm moving, or I'm, this one little thing is leading me in this other direction, and that, like, great. Whatever it is, I feel like just getting it out there.
Well, like Mom said, instead of treating us like a restaurant because you're an American, you have the right to go to another restaurant, treat us like a family, because that's how we view you.
Yes.
Wow. Well, I have no words to describe our Thanksgiving for you being involved in this podcast. It makes me, since this is the first time we've ever had a guest, now we've got 4. I want to have all 4 of you back, and we'll talk about something else. Because
sexuality apparently is
yes, sexuality.
Let's talk about sex, baby.
If you were thinking primarily, not exclusively, but primarily as we wind this down, of pastors and their spouses, it could be a woman pastor and her husband. It could be a male pastor and his wife, and then their children. If you had like a phrase, not a paragraph, because we need to wind this down, but if you had a phrase, one thing you'd like to leave with them, hey, I hope that, or I'm praying that, or from my perspective, I feel that, what would it be if you had one thing to say?
And this is, I want to clarify, this is to a pastor or to the parishioner?
I think
point.
to the pastor, and I hope that the parishioners are just listening and just saying, fascinated by looking into the inner workings of a pastoral family. But mostly to the pastor, the parental pastoral couple of kids, what's one thing that you could say in just a phrase, literally, so we can kind of leave the folks, listeners, with something, and then we're gonna sign off.
Mhm.
I can say something to the spouse.
Please
Spouse
say
to
it.
spouse.
Yeah.
I'm the least articulate of all of us, but and I would say encouragement, not advice. Make sure you nurture your relationship with Jesus outside of the church that your spouse is pastoring, because everything's going to flow from that relationship anyway. How you parent, how you do your marriage. But I found that it was helpful for me to nurture my relationship with Jesus outside the church, because then my identity was just with Jesus, and it wasn't about being a pastor's wife or people looking at me. And I mean, it could be with nature, it could be a Bible study, it could be with family and friends outside of the church. I just found that to be
Life-saving,
yeah,
literally life-saving
Yeah.
for 35 years.
emotionally, mentally, spiritually.
So that on this other side, you still believe in Jesus in spite
Exactly.
of, I know the firing has kind of been the focal point because that was so huge, but we had on the other side of that year, we had 32 other years of pastoring in three
Right.
different parishes. Yeah. That's such a good word, Carla. Ladies,
I feel, I'm sorry, because I am such a verbal processor. So to think of
you're
something
good.
that
You're good.
so I'm like feeling the pressure. It's why I didn't
No
answer.
pressure.
I'm a 6. I need about 4 days to do all this.
Oh man. So I echo what Mom said, and you're like, well, that should be common sense, but it's not.
Mhm.
And so then the other thing that that was on my heart is self-awareness.
Mm.
And I think that comes clearly in relationship with Jesus. But then I'm thinking a therapist or a spiritual director or a spiritual advisor or someone
Hmm.
who can help you have a dialogue about Jesus and how he is just infiltrating your heart and your life, and then how that's affecting you as a pastor, as a spouse, as a pastor's kid or whatever. Because so much comes with that self-awareness. And as I've watched our family kind of all of our relationship evolve, I think of the therapy that we've gone to, or the tools like the Enneagram, and it's the dialogue that it facilitates, not only with each other, but in my own heart, with God. It's just a pretty amazing thing. So
Good word, self-awareness. That's really good. And sometimes you need help.
absolutely.
Caroline, Leanne?
Mine is short, but I just kept thinking it's not your responsibility, and also you cannot save the world.
Hmm.
And so don't even try.
You're saying that to pastoral parents.
I'm
Stop
saying
trying
that to
save the world
pastors.
because you can't. No, you're right.
Yeah.
And you know what? I thought I could. As a young person, as a young pastor, I thought I could. So that is a powerful word. Thanks, Caroline. Leanne?
I have this picture of just whatever plant, being a plant, whatever kind of plant you are, and really just rooting yourself in God's love. And that's so hard because the enemy does not want that. So I think that really is a fight. It's a daily, sometimes moment by moment fight. But I'm just thinking, just rooting and nourishing, being nourished by God's love.
Which again seems self-evident, doesn't it? But it's not always, you know, for me, for many years as a pastor, it was not that way at all.
No.
And I did feel that a lot, that the enemy was at our family. And I'm not, you know, I don't see a demon under every rock and everything, but I felt like he did not want our family to succeed. So to be
Indeed.
rooted in Jesus, that's the answer.
So we're going to sign off here. I think I just would like to, I don't know if you've read this part of this new book that hasn't been released yet, but you know, I dedicate this book that's entitled Free, about the love of Jesus, to you three girls. And in the acknowledgments at the very end, like in the last paragraph of the book, this is what I say. And I don't know if you've read this or not, but I kind of want to sign off with this. In the acknowledgments, you're thanking everybody that's been a part of the journey of writing this particular book. Finally, to Andrea, Leanne, and Caroline, it has been the greatest honor of my life to be your father. Indeed, you are my heart. I dedicate this book about the wondrous, abiding love of Jesus to each of you, praying that somehow my deep love for you will continue to point you to his. And I think your mom and I both say that to you tonight, and till our last breath, that is our hope. So thank you for bearing your spirits in front of, you know, our podcast audience. And we believe there'll be some really good fruit from it for some folks out there fighting the good fight. So haven't ever had to sign off with guests, but thank you so much. Checks in the mail, and we will talk soon, girls. And
Love you. Thank you for your grace towards us.
Yeah.
Thanks for creating space.
Love you so much.
Love you.
Bye.
Love you.